Hi everyone, welcome to the final part of how to paint a still life using the grisaille and glaze method. For this colorization process, I have chosen 5 tubes of paint, those being zinc white, phthalo emerald, perylene red, transparent yellow, and ultramarine blue. You don't have to be exact on the red and the green colors here. Any basic green and red will do, just as long as it's transparent. This is just what I had on hand. Now to the mixing. 2 greens are needed here for the fruit, 1 darker green for the limes with a little bit of ultramarine blue added, and a more yellow green for the pears. The yellow colors for the lemons and the cup are both straight from the tube, as is the ultramarine blue and the other color highlights. The zinc white is for the highlights and is important. I wouldn't recommend subbing the zinc white for a titanium white, as zinc white is the most transparent of all of the whites, and my aim here is not to make a pastel of any of the elements. The pinkier colors I'm mixing here are for layering on the pears and will be used sparingly. I will also be using the Perylene red straight from the tube for that. Be sure to wipe your palette knife off with a baby wipe so as not to contaminate your freshly mixed colors. We want crisp, bright pigments for this. And lastly, the brown you will see me use later I did not mix here, but is a mix of the red, yellow, and blue with a bit of green. You can tone that brown as you like for your color preference of wood. Now that we have our colors mixed, you can add some artist's painting medium to each of the colors as you're using them. If you add them all at once, the last color you use might turn a bit gummy on the palette. Don't go crazy on the medium, just a dime size for this amount of paint ought to do the trick to begin with. If you feel like you need more, add more. There's no real recipe. For the large areas, I will be using this brush which holds a good amount of paint and gives me a nice soft blend. I should begin by saying your canvas needs to be really dry before you begin your glaze. Having a mostly dry canvas will not work for this because you'll run the risk of the medium pulling up that grisaille layer and making your nice intense colors a milky mess. I let this canvas dry for about 4 to 6 weeks and none of my layers were at all thick, if that gives you any idea of how long to let yours dry. You'll develop a knowing about this as your time as an artist goes on, but this, as you can see, is why this method is said to take so long. Not really in execution, but in dry time. Starting with the lemons, I'm literally just laying down the thin transparent yellow over the grisaille layer. Start thin and try not to get too much paint on your brush because at this point, your paint is very runny. You can keep layering and intensifying the color as you go. We'll come back to work on the lemons later, but for now I want this color to set up for a little bit. For the limes, you can see how the medium can tend to pool initially. No biggie. You can always sop up the paint here by wiping your brush clean and going back over it, and as you let the paint sit on your canvas, you'll find that it becomes less liquid and easier to blend into itself. Again, we'll continue on the limes a little bit later. For the pears, again, don't worry about any streaking. Just pull that color over and keep patting the pigment onto the canvas. It will become more pliable and less runny in just a minute or so. You can see here that I'm starting to add in some of the warmer values to give the pear a little more of a pinky glow that will balance the pink I'm about to put on. Fruit tends to vary in color, so be sure to adjust your paint to your fruity model. Later I will come back with some hints of yellow and even some orange. I'm continuing to add in more of the red here, patting and pushing the paint in more than brushing it on. Brushing can pull up the color you have just put on, but patting the color in allows for the layers of color to play together on the canvas more. You can also start to see the blotchy patterning and texture of the pear happening here by pressing that color in rather than creating a super smoothly brushed look. If you need to pick up color, you can remove it by wiping your brush clean with a dry paper towel or using a clean brush. Same method goes for the second pear. When doing a still life, I like to mix up the looks of the types of fruit that tend to have a varied appearance like pears do. I didn't select two pears with a similar color patterning because I feel it adds more interest and variety to a scene like this to have something different to look at. Lemons and limes are repetitive enough. Again, I'm patting that glaze into the green glaze layer, giving it some warmth and vitality. Adding touches of yellow gives another dimension of life to these pears. You can see how great the technique of glazing is on these pears with the layering of such pigmented colors. In many cases, not all cases, but many, I feel like this technique really gives more of an effect of life and realism than the alla prima technique. Now for the wooden table. Again, I have mixed up a nice warm brown, the same color as my table. You can tone your brown as you like it using the same mixture of colors though. I used a touch more red in this mix to warm it up. The wood we're painting here is just going to be a one layer wash of this color. Super simple because we've already done all the hard work with our grisaille. You might be able to see here on my canvas what I like to call environmental bits. Dust, pet hair, baby wipe fibers, brush hairs, whatever it may be. Let me tell you, if you paint over these with glaze, you will become instantly frustrated. Glaze will pool around these little bits and become so incredibly obvious it will drive you crazy. So, when I see evidence of environmental bits, I reach for a piece of Scotch tape and pick them all up in a flash. For this table reflection, I'm going to paint around it in the same manner that I have been, but I will wipe my brush clean on a dry paper towel and dry brush over those reflections to tone the area. Back to the lemons. Here I'm warming up those shadows with a bit of that same brown I just used on the table. Just patting a little of it in slightly to pull those cool shadows up to a warmer look. Full disclosure here, there are certain transparent colors that I don't feel work completely perfectly for the grisaille method, and this is one of those instances. I don't feel like you can get that light, super bright tone of lemons with this method. It's not that big of a deal, the outcome won't look bad, but I'm a perfectionist and I notice these things. It will all still read well in the end, so if you're like me, don't worry about it. It's just something to know about glazes and keep in mind. I'm also going in here with some yellow on the limes to give more of a color dimension. Now for some very light touches of that zinc white to emphasize the light hitting these lemons and pull the shape of them out towards the viewer and emphasize their texture. A little goes a long way here, so don't get crazy, even though I know it's fun. On to the roses. I've laid in a very thin wash of the Perylene red here, so that is primarily medium and only a tiny bit of pigment. Pink is another one of those colors I'm not overly thrilled with when it comes to glazing. Certain pinks will work just fine, but cooler pinks are a bit more of a headache and take more working. In these situations, I work on intensifying the shadows with pigment and hiding that grayish tone that's coming up from beneath the glaze. I lift the glaze with a dry brush for the rose's highlights and add more glaze for the shadows. It's about pushing in certain areas and pulling out others. Same technique for the other roses. The top rose isn't showing up so well because of my lighting, I'm sorry. You can see it better in the final picture at the end of this video though. I have skipped ahead on the teacup because again, it was just a straight wash of the yellow and medium, more medium than pigment, and I kept it really thin. Same with the blue trim on the cup. That's also a very medium to down ultramarine blue. In this technique, it's as though we're using the medium in place of white as we normally would in the alla prima technique. The napkin is again super simple, just a wash primarily of ultramarine blue with a bit of the Perylene red, keeping it on the cooler side of things. Now I'm coming in to intensify the shadows with a tiny bit of a warmer color here. Remember the shadow rule, warm shadows for cool objects, cool shadows for warm objects. Back to the rose. Just going back and intensifying shadows and adding the leaves with the same mix as we had for the limes with a little more yellow added. I always enjoy doing reflections on things because I feel it really adds a lot of life and vitality to a painting. I start with the reflections of the napkin, working towards the two reflections of the teacup, and then over to the fruit and the window that is behind the viewer here. literally taking the same colors as we already used and placing them where they should be. Same goes for the spoon. For the background again, it's straight ultramarine blue, even though it looks much darker. It's the magic of the grisaille. Having the same color served for both the trim on the cup and the background is pretty magical in my books. I did 2 layers of the blue to intensify the color just a bit. Now for some little touches of reflection here, lessening that hard line of the tea in the cup for a nice blurred line as you'd see in real life. I've also taken some of that zinc white to pull up the reflections from the cup beneath the tea. I'm intensifying some of the reflections of light on the cup with the zinc white as well. And that's it! Here's the finished product. As if by magic, this 2D still life now has color, vitality, and more dimension. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. If you've been following along since the first one, you're a total rock star, and I really hope you learned something new. As always, if you guys have any questions, please leave them below and I'll be sure to answer them for you. If there's any other tutorial you'd like to see as well, let me know. I'm always interested to know what you're struggling to paint, and if I can help, then I will do my best. Have a fantastic day, everyone. Happy painting!